Every year since 1989, the Library of Congress has selected 25 films to add to the National Film Registry. The criteria? The films must be culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant.
Each week on You're Missing Out, we take a look at one of these films to try and get to the heart of why they were selected and why they still matter.
This week, returning guest Sierra Webb is here for the 1957 cartoon, What's Opera Doc?
Our guest today describes themselves as the coolest person alive, a real-life Valkyrie, asterisk John Cena sound, asterisk, Sierra Webb.
That's me.
Well,
Hi. Hello.
This is a long time coming. This is, an OG season 1 guest who, if you ask us, hasn't been on since 2020, and if you ask her, hasn't been on since 2019. Apparently, thanks.
Time is a flat circle, y'all.
Yeah, think we Sierra, who I don't. Do you know we're on camera, right? You know this is being recorded for the YouTubes, right? I just wanted to let you know that the dance you're doing is being recorded.
I would like to involve my attorney.
Yeah. We're so glad to have you here. You were on the very first season of the show, and we are finally getting you back on the program. It was nice because it was, I think, in exchange when we started season 4, when we were planning it out. I forget who even brought it up at first, but it was just a conversation around like, oh yeah, Sierra hasn't been on in a while. Let's do that.
Yeah.
And in this case, we actually sent you a fair amount of titles to choose from. And,
yes.
Last time, like I said, you were on for John Ford's The Searchers.
Mm-hmm.
Because, we always talked about Westerns. And then with this, there were a number of titles. And I was like, this could go a number of ways. I was like, could go Morocco, could go Bonnie and Clyde, could go a number of directions. But once I heard that you had selected What's Opera Doc, I certainly went, well, of course. Right. How did I not think of that? How did I not guess that immediately? But why don't we talk a little bit, if you wouldn't mind, Sarah, about what exactly made you settle on What's Opera Doc? What's your relationship to that film and kind of the Looney Tunes, Chuck Jones world of it all?
Well, first and foremost, the last time I was on, I watched The Searchers, and I think COVID did something to my attention span, so I had to pick the one that was only 6 minutes long. So
That's fair.
There's that. But no, on the real, I grew up in front of cartoons, and there are episodes of Merrie Melodies and the Looney Tunes that I have memorized, like genuinely. So I mean, when I saw this on the list, I had to, because I would be pissed off if anybody else did it. Like when I was a kid, I really wanted to be an animator, and Chuck Jones is like one of the all-time greats. He has such a unique style. You can see instantly if it's something done by him. And he also created the way that cartoons have been made and how they've been passed the torch. And we can get into the rules that he has for characters, specifically the Wile E. Coyote rules. So there's just I had to. And then this one, of course, is perfect. I will say that in my brain, when I instantly picked it, I forgot that this was not the Rabbit of Seville.
Yeah.
Which I also, they're both incredible, but this one is one of, I think, 3 different opera takes that the Looney Tunes have done. And I love a good deep cut joke series.
I mean, I'll say this. Part of the reason that I asked that the way that I do is that typically at the start of these episodes, I usually ask the guest and Tom and myself, we all answer when was the first time you saw blank? But this in particular, and knowing the three of us, I don't think, and Tom, you can tell me if I'm wrong, I don't think any of us can reasonably answer when was the first time we saw What's
No,
Opera Doc,
there's
because
there's no possible way to figure that out because we're all around the same age, so we all really did come up in that '90s Looney Tunes resurgence when it was really coming back. The Michael Jordan commercial with them was a big part of that, which then obviously led to Space Jam. But the Looney Tunes were big, man. You know, everybody had the fucking Looney Tunes clothes. You know,
the Warner
even like
store,
in video, yeah, the
the
Warner
malls.
store. But
I'm for today. I am
you
wearing
know,
a Warner store denim shirt from the the
interesting.
defunct
I'm wearing
retailer.
nothing related. So I did the homework. Um, but even like video games, man. You know, Spielberg helped with this with you know, Animaniacs and Tiny Toons and all of that. You know, there were video games and everything. I remember very distinctly spending a lot of time playing the Tasmanian Devil Super Nintendo game a lot.
Was that for Tasmania? Was that the tie-in to the Tasmania cartoon?
I think so. I mean, I just
think
remember
so.
being a Tasmanian Devil game, and it
Yeah,
was
I
great.
think I had that for the Sega. Yeah, I remember that one.
But I mean, we came, like Looney Tunes was, you know, big at the time when we were kids. It was kind of like, it was weird how it was this old thing that our parents were into, but then it became hip and cool again for us. So it didn't feel like any of those weird kids who's like only watched like things on fucking Nick at Night. So they had their only cultural references were like fucking Leave It to Beaver or whatever. Um, because their parents don't like the violent TV that's going on now.
And
Um,
I think, you know, you mentioned that Looney Tunes resurgence. Now their factor is cable, right?
yeah,
Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Cartoon
obviously,
Network.
you know, yeah, Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, all of these channels that needed to fill content, and Hanna-Barbera and Warner Brothers had these robust libraries, you know, and
Yeah,
Disney had their own channel, right? So you weren't seeing like Mickey Mouse or Donald cartoons anywhere that wasn't the Disney Channel or like the Disney Afternoon syndicated block, and even then that was new content.
Yeah.
Whereas Warner Brothers, especially in the '90s, was like, "What's that? You want to air our cartoons? Sure, go for it. We don't care. You want to pay us for these? Fine.
it's a
We'll
long
hand
way. They've come a long way since those days.
yeah. We're gonna edit some. Don't get me wrong. We're gonna edit some out." Which they were already doing in our parents' day. I remember my dad always tells me there was one Bugs Bunny cartoon that he remembered watching as a kid that, like, for the last 2 minutes, the screen was just black. And that's because even in, like, the 60s, they went, oh, we got to get the racism out of this one. We got
Yeah.
to just, it
Oh,
was,
we gotta edit Bugs out of the grassy knoll.
Tom, there's one where, I don't remember this one. Sarah, you might remember this cartoon. I don't remember the title. But it's one where, like, Bugs is being hunted down. I don't remember who. And the person goes, do you have a last wish? And Bugs goes, yes, I wish, I wish, I wish I was in the land of cotton. Dun, dun, and starts singing Dixie, right? And so the
Wow.
version that my father saw growing up was just like the screen goes black. And it's like, funny bit with a song. But you can probably guess the style that Bugs is dressed in and made up in when he sings that song in the original cartoon.
Yes. Yeah.
Some
That one
crazy
was
stuff.
oh man. I don't remember that. I don't remember what the name was, but yeah, that's definitely one of them where they like I very distinctly remember like they were like drawing a line or something,
Yeah.
and then like, hey, no, you're south of the Mason Dixon
Mm.
line or something like that. And I maybe that's not the right one, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't,
Yeah.
well, eloquently said, Webb.
It's no, so it's interesting. But we grew up with all of these. I couldn't tell you, you know, which ones I saw. I mean, I know the iconography because I
Oh,
think,
yeah, no.
you
We
know,
just sat down and watched them. You know,
yeah.
there was no. It wasn't like today where with you could just hit the info button on your remote and it'll tell you what the episode is. You just kind of clicked on Cartoon Network and it was just like, let's see what they're showing now.
Yeah, I did just use the power of the internet. It's called Southern Fried Rabbit.
Of course it is. Of course it
Yeah,
is.
and
That sounds good in gumbo though.
Well, I mean, at least they made the bad guy part of the Confederate Army.
Yeah, yeah. Now,
That is a
doesn't
big
always.
big win for the
That's not
50s.
that's
Yeah.
not great. It's
No.
bad. It's all
No.
bad. It's
And
all
there's.
bad.
Can I tell you, Sarah? There's worse ones. I watched one that I remember texting Tom after I watched it recently and just went, "This is upsetting to me today." This is
Yeah.
like even now when I've accepted like old timey racism in Looney Tunes cartoons. Jesus Christ, who okayed this?
Did you text me that?
You
Yes,
accepted racism? Is that
I.
what you?
What? No, I'm saying like when you
Yeah.
accept like I've watched the censored 11, right? Like I've
Right.
watched those infamous like for people watching or listening who don't know, there are 11 Warner Brothers cartoons that were so offensive and are so offensive that unlike the Disney thing where Disney was like, Song of the South is so offensive, we're keeping it in the vault. We're never going to officially release it.
Okay.
Warner Brothers went the opposite route. They went, we disown this. We will not renew the copyright. We're not touching it. Right. Um, and the thing is, you come across those because there's one in particular, which is a Snow White parody. See if you can figure out why it's censored, called Coal Black and the Seven Dwarves. That animation scholars talk about because they go, well, the actual animation work in this thing is really remarkable. It is unfortunately in the service of something really distasteful. But so I've seen those. I've seen the censored 11, some degree, or I've seen some of the censored 11. A lot of those ones that are questionable. I came across one recently that was a parody of Uncle Tom's Cabin called Uncle
No.
Tom's Bungalow. That's what I texted you about, Tom, because I just went like, oh God. Like, and
Yeah.
you can see how, like, at the time they were doing this, like, well, it's a classic American novel. We can parody it. But you're like, I did not expect Looney Tunes to do slavery jokes. That's
Yeah.
a rough one. That's a real rough one. And all of that to say, thankfully, nothing offensive in What's Opera Doc. Not always the
No.
case. Like I'm a big, I'm a big Disney animation nut. Like I know Disney history very well.
No.
I'm pretty Is
Who,
did
you?
the owl guy behind me from the old music cartoons give that away?
What
Professor
owl
Owl's
guy?
back there. Professor Owl, right over there. Do you see I'm pointing to him? That's a
Yeah, move a lot of
poster.
frame, but yeah.
Yeah, he's off to the side here. Professor Owl taught you about music in a couple of shorts from the '60s. Anyway, I'm more of a Disney animation fan, and it's I think part of that comes out of the fact that like Disney's catalog is a little easier to find because there aren't these. There are, I mean, like Mickey's melodrama is certainly distasteful, and Song of the South is distasteful, but like Looney Tunes is this weird nebulous thing where like because it's so scattershot and because you had some Tex Avery, some Chuck Jones, a lot of these influential figures, the
Mhm.
content is scattershot from really highbrow to really lowbrow. It's all over the place in terms of the stuff they do.
Yeah.
And as the decades go on, too, like we kind of think of the 40s or the 50s content, especially like most people don't know who Bunny and Claude were. Like they don't realize that was also part of that Looney Tunes rush. Or
Right.
yeah,
Well, I
it's
mean, I guess it makes sense since the whole Looney Tunes, Merrie Melodies, like their whole thing is just chaos. That's
yeah,
what their cartoons are. It's all about chaos. So it kind of feels like it makes sense that they would kind of just throw a lot of shit at the wall and see if it worked, and kind of weren't really thinking about how is this going to play in a
Yeah.
year, 5 years,
yeah,
10 years. Um, and I mean, that's what leads to maybe why I think Looney Tunes and all of this shit is probably my favorite of all the old cartoon stuff, and why it's always going to be hard for them to recreate it. Which is just even the recordings of it is just get Mel Blanc and get him a broken down old microphone, put him in a back alley, and just have him scream. Which is just listening to that man scream his head off is the funniest fucking thing in the world. I
And it
like
popped.
like looking at the credits, the credits. There's 2 credits, but like voice cast: Mel Blanc as Bugs Bunny (parentheses as Brunhild), and also as Elmer Fudd (parentheses yelling smog).
Yep.
So it's
Yeah,
just like,
I was gonna bring that up later. That he
so
has
just
one
like
line as Elmer Fudd.
so just like, oh, we need Elmer Fudd to scream. Get Mel on the phone.
Just
I
get him.
just like it's so fucking funny. But that's what, it's not to excuse it. Obviously, 0 out of 10 would not recommend. But you
Mhm.
do you do kind of understand where it's like, oh yeah, we're just doing wacky crazy shit, throwing it at the wall, and they weren't thinking this shit was gonna be seen
No.
ever again.
And that's why something like this, like, and we'll talk about it. So let's get into the film itself. But like, What's Opera Doc was not like well received when it first came out. It was not like, it wasn't like people saw it and went, masterpiece. It wasn't until the generation watching it on TV. It wasn't until the baby boomers. It wasn't until people like a Joe Dante or whatever, and all of these animation nerds
Yeah.
and Spielberg and all were watching it and cared about Chuck Jones and cared about all of that, that it was suddenly, seen as the pinnacle, right? Whereas before, that was not talked about, as a part of the catalog. And then it, of course, becomes, as we're going to get into, to show how its legacy changes, it becomes the first Looney Tunes cartoon to get into the National Film Registry. It becomes, they say, they call it the first cartoon to get into the National Film Registry. Previously, there had been 2 animated features, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Fantasia. Gertie the Dinosaur got in its 3rd year. I would count that as a cartoon, but I guess because it's an animation live-action hybrid, they don't. What I would love to get your reaction to, Sierra, is, okay, What's Opera Doc is the first Looney Tunes cartoon to get into the National Film Registry. And it gets in its 4th year. You love Looney Tunes. We all know there are so many iconic Looney Tunes. How many Looney Tunes cartoons, if you had to ballpark it, do you think are in the National Film Registry? And remember, this has been going on as an entity since 1989.
I feel like this is a trick question, so I'm going to say just this one.
A little better than that, but not by much. Of the 900 and something films that are in the registry, there are 4 Looney Tunes cartoons. Only 4.
Right on. What are the others?
So it's What's Opera Doc, Duck Amuck, Porky and Wacky Land, and One Froggy Evening.
Yeah.
That's
Duck
it.
Amuck is incredible.
Yeah.
And legitimately my favorite Looney Tune episode.
Well, a number of years ago, there was that book. I'm sure we've all seen it in some capacity. That it was in 1994. It was actually that polled 1,000 members of the animation industry and asked them like their favorite cartoons. There's this book, you see it all the time, the 50 greatest cartoons of all time. Right? There's this list, and I believe number 1 and number 2. Number 1 is What's Opera Doc. Number 2 is Duck Amuck. So they are right up at the top.
Yeah.
And then I
genuinely surprised that the one with Bugs conducting the orchestra is not in.
Yeah. Well, that's oh, you're talking about oh god, which one was that? Is that I don't remember.
I can't remember the name of this shit.
Baton Bunny,
like
I think it's called. Is it Baton Bunny?
Maybe, I don't know,
Yeah.
but
Well,
honestly,
that
this is
Rabbit Season, Duck Season isn't in.
I mean, yeah, there's no
There's
Roadrunner in there.
No Sylvester Tweety. No
Sylvester Tweety.
No Pepe Le Pew. No Speedy Gonzales. I mean, those Warner Brothers are pretending aren't there, but
sex offender.
Hey,
Pepe
Speedy Gonzales. Hey, Pepe Le Pew got canceled from Space Jam 2.
Yes, he did.
But Speedy was in there.
Yes, he was.
My man Speedy got in there. We love some Speedy. But this is
Pepe Le Pew should be canceled. That's
Pepe Le Pew. Sarah, I will say this with Pepe Le Pew. I think my understanding of Pepe Le Pew has shifted quite a bit in doing this show and doing research for the show, because one of the things that we talked about with the Looney Tunes, and then we will get into What's Opera Doc proper, but one of the things we talked about with the Looney Tunes is they're responding to the pop culture of the time, right? We were acknowledging this before. They were, they didn't think people would see this in 50 years. They were just responding to the pop culture of the time. There's a lot of these cartoons that require a lot of kind of or that are aided by context, right? I mean, how many of these Looney Tunes cartoons did we watch as a kid that were referencing Hollywood stars who none of us had seen any of the movies of, right? So
Absolutely blew my mind watching M the first time and being like, oh, that's the guy from the fucking Looney Tunes
yes,
cartoons.
yeah,
Right.
Yes.
I mean, there's a runner gag in a Looney Tunes cartoon that is just doing Treasure of the Sierra Madre, like it's just having Bogart. Okay, so all of that, right? The more Maurice Chevalier movies you watch, the more Pepe Le Pew becomes abundantly clear, right? Like the fact that, like, again, you watch the Chevalier films that are, Chevalier, this romantic Frenchman, and he just walks up to any woman and just, oh, chérie, I love you, blah, blah, blah. And then you watch Pepe Le Pew again and go, oh, he's just Maurice. The joke of this is that he's Maurice Chevalier. That's the joke. Like, the entire gag is he's Maurice Chevalier, and his smooth French moves work on any skunk, and he thinks this cat's a skunk. End of story. Like, that's it. Does not mean that it plays great today without that context. I want to be clear.
That's
Yeah.
that reminds me of I just saw a video on Instagram of Anthony Jeselnik talking about an age joke he used to make that always killed, but like as time went on, he realized that it's not working anymore because the joke was, oh, my family was like the Brady Bunch. There was a lot of us, and my dad died of AIDS. And he realized as time went on, the people listening to the joke didn't know what the Brady Bunch was.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is, these things need context. And I think,
Yeah.
with that in mind, I do think it's interesting. Let's get into What's Opera Doc specifically, because there is something to the fact that, we are of a generation who essentially learned Wagner from this cartoon, right? We learned all this from this cartoon. Before we say anything about What's Opera Doc specifically, let's hear what the Library of Congress had to say. Here's what the National Film Registry had to say about What's Opera Doc.
In this animation classic, Elmer Fudd's pursuit of Bugs Bunny is set to opera music and plays out on a Wagnerian scale. The film features such now classic lines as "Kill the Wabbit" and is one of only 3 cartoons in which Elmer Fudd bests his rival Bugs. Directed by renowned animator Chuck Jones and his team at Warner Brothers, this 7-minute short film is often considered to be Jones's cinematic masterpiece. It holds the distinction of being the first cartoon selected for inclusion in the National Film Registry.
So, What's Opera Doc? We've obviously, as we alluded to, none of us can say the first time we saw it, but I will pivot to, can any of us hear Ride of the Valkyries or any of these songs from the Ring Cycle or Tannhauser without hearing the Bugs Bunny or Elmer Fudd lyrics? Is it possible?
Well, I mean, for Ride of the Valkyries, yeah, it's possible, just because of Apocalypse Now at this point.
That's fair.
I don't know, man. Even when I watch Apocalypse Now, I'm still
You're
picturing
still
Elmer
Kill the Wabbit?
Fudd shoving the spear in the hole, going yo ho ho.
Hey, Mike, you want to do you want to do that motion again while you're
Thanks,
on camera?
Tom. Real supportive. So,
no, but otherwise, no, I can't hear the other songs without thinking about. But also at the same time, I have a worm-infested brain, so there's not a day that goes by where I'm not thinking of some Looney Tunes thing going on in my head.
I mean, on some other episode of this show, I don't remember which one, but I believe you uttered the sentence, "Don't speak ill of that stone cold stud Elmer Fudd." I don't remember
Listen,
the context.
that guy. I don't even. You say I said that, and I'm just gonna have to be like, I gotta take your word for it, bro. Don't even remember putting those words together ever in my life.
But do you doubt that you said it? Is the question.
No, I don't doubt that I said it. That guy fucks. That guy fucks. Yeah, he does.
Is this your take on Elmer Fudd?
That's why he's got a lisp. That's why he's got a lisp. He can't stop it.
He keeps trying to fuck Bugs Bunny.
What's Opera Doc? I mean, one of the things that I suppose the funny thing is, I guess, at least for me, and I don't speak this, but at least for me, when you're watching this stuff as a kid, right, and you're watching cartoons as a kid, they kind of just all exist as one
Yeah.
conglomerate thing of the past. So I know What's Opera Doc because I watched it a million times. And before I rewatched it for this, doing research and watching like Chuck Jones documentaries and making ofs and things like that, I keep hearing people go, and obviously it's a parody of Fantasia. And
Wow.
I
It is.
right. Okay, I'm glad we're all having the
I
same
caught it.
Okay.
I caught it at the
Okay,
beginning.
yeah. So I'm glad we're all having the same experience, which is like as a kid, you're just like, yeah, Fantasia, What's Opera Doc, all of these things exist in the past. And they talk about this, and watching it now, I was just like, oh yeah, like the Elmer Fudd's shadow, right, with the horns is meant to look like
Yeah.
Chernabog. The background,
Yes.
and it goes so much that one thing I found out that I thought was very interesting, the dancers that were models for the Dance of the Hours sequence in Fantasia, the thing with the hippos and
Yeah.
they were then working for Warner Brothers. Like, again, it's been like a decade plus. They were working for Warner Brothers in some projects. And so Chuck Jones had them brought in to model the dance that Elmer and Bugs do. So when you're watching this, if you noticed that Elmer and Bugs, like, their movement is really fluid. They look like ballet dancers. That is because they were literally like not rotoscoped, but like the animators were working off of real ballet dancers doing this specific ballet.
See, I just love that those guys making this are just themselves little stinkers of just like, hey, we're gonna take the piss out of Fantasia. Oh, we could get them broads that danced in the cartoon 17 years ago. Bring them over. We're gonna draw them and make fun of those fucks at Disney.
But this is the thing: is that Chuck Jones specifically, because he's so interested in animation, and obviously, Sierra, you can speak to this more than I can for sure. But it's What's Opera Doc is simultaneously like parody of Fantasia and also admiration of Fantasia, because if you look at those backgrounds, that art style, Chuck Jones is not a guy who didn't take animation seriously. In the documentary I watched, the full title escapes me. I'll put it up on screen or something. But the documentary I watched, he makes the point where he goes, his first thing you hear him say is he goes, Gertie the dinosaur debuted in 1914. I debuted in 1912. We kind of came up at the same time, which is crazy to think about. But yeah, Sarah, like I'm saying, you can obviously talk more to this, but like Chuck Jones was funny. Obviously, he was a comic filmmaker, but he was serious about the art of animation.
I mean, he worked for everybody. He worked for Disney. He worked for, he did Dr. Seuss. He did like all the MGM stuff, and he created characters that like, everybody knows, so yeah, I mean, he is absolutely one of the quintessential animators. Like when you think of comics, you think of like Stan Lee. He's the Stan Lee equivalent to animation.
Well, I mean, even in that regard, I mean, you could kind of say Walt was the Stan Lee insofar as both of them kind of took credit for some other people's art. But we're not going to talk about that.
Exactly.
I mean, but with Chuck Jones, like one film that I talked about previously, on the show, because I submitted it to the registry and I'm adamant about getting it in. Yeah, I was an early Chuck Jones film, which is The Dover Boys at Pimento University, right? Where he essentially pioneers. I know some other people have done it to some degree, but he pioneers this limited animation technique. In and amongst, right? You know what I'm talking about. I don't. Obviously, you can speak to that. I don't want to just monopolize, but
I mean, no, he absolutely. I mean, and he has just such a very unique style too. Like if you look at a Chuck Jones piece, you know exactly who it's from. Like why does and that's actually kind of, for me, that was really when I started to notice, like as a kid, like I started to notice the differences in style, and like, oh, your own style can be your own thing. Like Bugs Bunny looks different in this cartoon than he does in the other one. Why does he look different? Like, oh, because a different guy did it. And like this different guy did it in a way that was so uniquely his. And like I don't think that answers your question, but I mean, I just went with that thought. But yeah, and that's what I love so much about Chuck Jones is like, yeah, like the Grinch. That is such an iconic piece of animation history, and like it also just like locks in your brain as like that very specific style, and that's Chuck Jones.
And to jump off of what she's saying about how for her it was kind of like that moment where you noticed the different styles and everything. And I honestly, it was the same thing for me too. It was because um I feel like a lot of the mainstream cartoons we were getting at the time in the 80s and early 90s before the Looney Tunes kind of exploded again were, they were cheap and kind of safe and they weren't really doing anything. And then you get these fucking guys coming out, these old cartoons, but they coming out and they're chaotic and they're energetic and they're all about little stinkers pulling one over on each other and all of that, which feels like its resurgence in the 90s is responsible for the cartoons that we have now, basically. Would we
Exactly.
have Ren and Stimpy? Would Ren and Stimpy have been greenlit without the resurgence of these guys? Would Our Real Monsters, Adult Swim, all the way to leading on to the shit we got now with
Right.
it brought an energy back to cartoons, which while we're not getting, I mean, we do kind of now get mature cartoons, but it brought a sensibility back that it didn't just have to be lowest common denominator shit that you just put your kids in front of the TV and let them just doze off. It literally had it would these things are so energetic and imaginative and would get you just like so riled up and just your synapses are firing that it would make kids more creative. Like I may not be a guy that would, if I get into the industry, would make cartoons or anything like this, but it helped me as a kid be creative and think about that stuff. Because like we both just said, made us think about style. I wasn't,
Right.
I wasn't thinking about fucking style of cartoons when I was watching GI Joe. You
Right,
know?
exactly. Because like GI Joe was a perfect example. Looked exactly like the Captain Planet. Looked exactly like whatever the fuck was
Gem and the
on.
Holograms. They were all farmed out to the
Yeah.
same
He-Man.
animation studio. So
And they
Yeah.
were all cranked out by the same people, and they all looked exactly the same. And then meanwhile, like, well, you could argue that Chuck Jones's style wasn't as strikingly beautiful, but then you jump to like a couple years ago when we have like shows that have a very very simplistic style that are like Adventure Time, for example.
Mhm.
Like they're a stone's throw away from stick figures. However, it's the content is just so much there, and I think that like going back specifically to um, you know this one, we the What's Opera Doc is brilliant. The content is brilliant. He's parodying opera, the highest of the highbrow content, and then like, and it's the Brunhilde story, and like so many people just like that's not just a like opera. That's also like Norse lore, you
and
know.
and he sticks to his guns with the parody by
Yeah,
ending it with, "Oh, it's an opera. What did you think? We were gonna have a happy ending?" Like
exactly.
he sticks to it, but while still making it like, listen, it's Bugs. He's okay, but also he died because it's this
Yeah,
story, because
well,
it's opera. But he's fine because he's Bugs.
I
But
mean,
yeah,
it's part of that is the blessing of this older cartoon format that we have lost over time, because this is what Disney and Looney Tunes would do, which is basically we're going to establish a character. That character has an archetype. That character has a way that they're going to be, and then there's no continuity. There's no nothing. We're just going to go, okay, these stock characters. We're now going to drop them into different scenarios, right?
yeah,
Like
right.
there's no, uh, in one cartoon, Mickey, Donald, Goofy are firemen. In another cartoon, they're clock cleaners, right? Similarly here, like you have, Daffy Duck can be, a cop, or he could be Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century. Or you can, the hell, I think it's called like Rocket Squad, which is just Daffy Duck is a cop in space. Have you ever seen Rocket Squad, Tom? I have to.
Probably.
It is Daffy Duck and Porky Pig essentially doing Dragnet, but in spaceships.
Yes.
It's one of their weirdest ones. But
Daffy Duck would be a cop, by the way.
But it's this thing of like, I just like, it is this thing with, you're talking about opera and the highest of the highest here. I think there is a thing of, part of why it works is that Chuck Jones respects opera. Like he talked about, in this documentary I was watching, he was like, oh, I use classical music a lot. And other people, like I've listened to other people say, well, Chuck Jones used classical music because the audience knows it, right? And there's beats to play on. And Chuck Jones went, I use classical music because it's the best music. Which is so interesting that he's, he paraphrases Mark Twain, where he evokes, there's the Mark Twain quote about Wagner, which is Wagner's music is so much better than it sounds. Which is such a perfect line for both Jones and Twain. But I just wanted to make that point that, like, I do think it's interesting that, and that's why I said it's, it's both a parody of Fantasia and kind of an admiration of Fantasia, because this specifically is a loving spoof, if you will. This is a loving tribute to the Ring Cycle and to Wagner and all of that. And I think that is what distinguishes this from so many other things.
It's that thing that that makes, Mel Brooks so good when he was cooking at his best, is that his movies felt like live action Looney Tunes cartoons. Where his movies, where Blazing Saddles was making fun of Westerns, but clearly he loved them. Young Frankenstein, making fun of the old Universal horror movies, but he loves them. That's why I always feel like I'm out of step with the Spaceballs love, because I genuinely don't think he likes Star Wars at all. And it feels like I don't think he ever watched a Star Wars when he made Spaceballs. So I always just felt that alone. I was just like, this isn't good, guys. Why are you laughing at this? But you get the same thing of just getting the thing you're kind of, taking the piss out of, like, fundamentally in your DNA. And, we're making fun of it. Oh, but it's great. It's also fun. Like, look at it. You don't really have to do anything else. It's great. But what if there was a bunny?
I mean,
he made a lisping hunter very horny.
And that's peak Chuck Jones in terms of, like, Sierra, you can speak to this too. Like, early Chuck Jones were those, I forget the mouse's name, but you remember the little, like, cutesy, sheepish mouse that he did, right? The, hey, mister, whatever it was.
Right,
that was early Chuck. And I think Dover Boys is the real breakthrough for him, because he talked about, even in the documentary, he talked about, he loved reading the Rover Boys when he was a kid. This book series of, like, collegiate young men getting up to antics, and the evil, I don't remember the actual villain's name, whoever the Dan Backslide is in the books, right?
Yeah.
And he says, like, I loved those books, but in those books, whenever they introduced Dan Backslide, they always called him, like, the cunning, nefarious, evil enemy of the the Rover Boys. And he went, and that's just stupid. So, like, the ethos of Chuck Jones, it feels like, and it comes out in this, is, I love this thing. I appreciate all of its artistry. But that's just stupid. Yeah. That's the film in a nutshell. That's his best work in a nutshell, right?
But I mean, the Dover Boys, that's classic, you know?
Oh, I love the Dover Boys.
P.S. The mouse's name was Sniffles.
Sniffles the mouse. That's what it was. Sniffles the mouse. That's, you probably, Tom, I bet you don't remember Sniffles the mouse, but you definitely saw the Sniffles the mouse.
Oh, yeah. No, I remember Sniffles the mouse. 100%.
That's
probably did. It's like we said, there's just so much of this stuff. Like when all of it was on HBO Max before that sort of cunt Zaslav took like half of it off.
Yeah.
What's Opera Doc being one of them that's just not on HBO Max anymore.
Yeah.
You get like your breath is almost taken away by how much there actually was, and how over such like a long period of time too, where you just go, fuck. I definitely watched all of these, but I couldn't put the puzzle together of how many. When did I see this one? How many times? What order? But there's just so much. And that's another thing, is that there's so much that isn't Bugs or Elmer or Tweety or Yosemite Sam or Speedy Gonzalez. There's a lot of stuff that Chuck and those boys did, and it's wild how much they did. I mean, it's you could spend a lot of time on just Looney Tunes and Chuck Jones's work and be busy for a while, honestly. It's the best. And also just, I know Sierra wasn't saying the Chuck Jones stuff, Looney Tunes aren't good looking. I know she wasn't saying that, but I just want to make it clear to everybody, these cartoons are fucking beautiful.
They are. They're gorgeous. And
during this period. During this period, they are. Yeah.
Yeah, but like the way this one opens, because it's trying to take the piss out of Fantasia a little bit. It does it. It looks fucking amazing, and then having just that great visual punchline of, oh, who's that big shadow? Oh, it's that little fuck Elmer.
Yeah.
I think part of what makes this one work too is you don't need to know their dynamic, right? Like there's not. It's obviously it helps if you know who Elmer Fudd is right away. Right?
Yeah.
But if this was somebody's first Looney Tunes cartoon, you still know the dynamic of Rabbit and Hunter, right? You still get that. And even if this is your first exposure to the Ring Cycle, right? Maybe you just kind of go like, oh, this is opera, this is silly, but you follow it. You get, I mean, obviously they don't call him Siegfried in this or anything like that, or whatever it would be. They don't use. I mean, you mentioned Sarah. They do use Brunhilde, right?
They do.
And she's so lovely, and she knows it, and she can't help it. But
drag queen icon Bugs Bunny.
We don't need to know either of those things. You don't need to know any of the stuff it's spoofing for it to land. And I think that's one of the when it works, and it doesn't always work with these Looney Tunes cartoons. Sometimes you do just watch it and go, what the hell is going on here? Especially those ones that are like the Hollywood Canine Canteen, which is just, what if a lot of Warner Brothers studio stars were dogs? And you're like, I now have to track this.
Listen, I love that idea.
No, Tom, I know what you're saying, but I need to stress to you that if you watch this, 75% of it is impenetrable, because you're just like, I wouldn't know who these stars are if you showed me their actual face. And now I am supposed to figure it out.
Bond?
No, but you know who there is a dog. Wait, but do you know who there is a dog based off of? To take it back to our very first episode, there is an Arthur Lake dog in it. There is Arthur Lake and Peggy Singleton as Blondie and Dagwood in Hollywood Canine Canteen.
Listen,
and that's like
nothing you're saying is dissuading me from watching this cartoon. This sounds fantastic.
I mean, that may be one of the ones on HBO Max. I don't know. We only know that the ones we wanted to watch aren't there.
What a fucking asshole Zaslav is! God damn it!
The fact that it's truly crazy how little is on there. But I will say, you mentioned how good they look. Sierra, I think you might relate to this. I sometimes would go on HBO Max and put the Looney Tunes on shuffle.
Yeah, I did that too.
Yeah, what do I get? And I remember, I think I texted Tom. I was actually at my parents' house and I was watching it. My dad was walking. He goes, "Oh, you're watching Looney Tunes?" I said, "Yeah." And some old black and white one just wrapped up, and it went on to the next one, and it was one of those like mid to late 60s ones. And I just let out the most audible where it's just like I forget which one it was. I think it was one of the like Porky and Daffy or Cops kind of ones, but like at this point in the 60s, Warner Brothers is kind of aping like that UPA animation style, right? Because I think that's one thing we should maybe talk about a bit here. Is we talked about the simplicity in some cases of what they were doing, and Chuck Jones obviously with Dover Boys pioneers sort of limited animation, right? Basically, how we should sometimes, Disney, when they were doing their animation, they're animating every single frame, right?
Right.
They are hand drawing every single cell. Jones with Dover Boys and so on, when you watch these and the characters move very quickly, he basically draws the position they start in, the position they end in, and then does like 3 or 4 cells that are just smudges, right? That are
Right.
just streaks. That still
And it
works.
worked. It worked
Yeah.
for an audience back in the 40s and 50s because their eyes were not attuned.
Yeah.
But now, like a modern audience, we can, because our eyes are so attuned to rapid frame rates, we can see it, whereas our grandparents could not.
But even when we see it, it's funny, right? Like that's the
Yeah.
thing that makes it hold up, is that it's funny when, I'm just gonna keep going back to Dover Boys, but when Dan Backslide just goes from being fully dressed to wearing his driving coat, right? And it's just done in like one quick movement, or he just is moving back and forth from the door and all that. It lands by the 50, by the time that What's Opera Doc is happening, UPA has come out, which is, I talked about UPA on a previous episode when I nominated Rudy Toot Toot to the registry, but UPA made up of former Disney animators, and they start really doing these like, we don't need to draw backgrounds. We can just use like, colored paper. Our characters can just be line drawings. It's the attention to detail goes out the window in favor of like very stylized animation. That is also coincidentally very cheap to do.
Right.
And what that ends up doing to both, in different ways, Disney and Warner Brothers, is that at a certain point, the folks up top start going, well, it's cheaper if we do it this way, and people seem to like this look, right? In the 60s, the look of like Xerox animation, people like the look of Xerox animation because they like the sketchy lines, and people like the abstract backgrounds instead of putting in the time to create realistic looking backgrounds or detailed backgrounds. But what that does mean is, if the people working on its heart isn't in it, kind of, or even just if they'd rather be doing something more. I mean, you can see it, Tom, just, for illustrative purposes, like think about, you and I both love Sleeping Beauty, right? And the level of details. The next one after that is 101 Dalmatians. And that's when it gets
Vastly
the Xerox
different.
sketchy style.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
I still love it, but
I don't, I'm not, I don't dislike 101 Dalmatians.
It is just very, very different.
The problem becomes 101 Dalmatians ends up leading to something like The Rescuers, where that Xerox style is so muddy that film is just tough to look at. And with Warner Brothers, it's kind of the same thing. Like, What's Opera Doc has those kind of stylized backgrounds that look a little bit like those UPA kind of Gerald McBoing shorts. But by the time the 60s roll around, the animation is just stilted. It doesn't look good. The fucking tiger, I forget his name. You remember the tiger, Sierra? That tiger in a necktie? That like Hanna-Barbera looking guy? You remember what I'm talking about, right?
It wasn't Snagglepuss, but it was the other one.
It was a tiger that looked like Snagglepuss. And you put him in the necktie so that you don't have to animate anything below the head. Like that guy. That was around, it's him, it's Bunny and Claude, it's that whole like, can we maybe introduce a new crop of characters? Tom, you seem to not react to Bunny. Do you remember Bunny and Claude?
No.
Okay. So you've described like Bugs Bunny as like a little secret. If I asked you to define Bugs Bunny, you could probably go for like a paragraph about why that character's interesting, right? Daffy Duck the same, Elmer Fudd the same. What if I told you Bunny and Claude, their game is they're Bonnie and Clyde, but they steal carrots?
Yeah.
You don't say.
That's it. That's the
Do they
entire
also
game.
kill innocent people?
No.
Model
No, they
T.
don't.
Well, then why am I watching?
It's Tom, that's the question a lot of people had in the 60s for the Warner Brothers cartoons.
Oh,
Why am I watching?
I based on my complete ignorance of these characters, I can see that's what happened.
So there is kind of in addition to this, there, and all that we're saying, there is kind of maybe a sadness to What's Opera Doc, because I do kind of look at it and it's like, here's this high watermark, and then knowing that's in 57. A decade later, it's Bunny and Claude and the tiger.
And This is the last time Chuck Jones did an Elmer Fudd thing, was what I'm seeing in
Yeah.
my research.
I think it's
which
the
is,
last. I think it's the last performance from that voice actor too.
I don't see that in my research. I just see
Okay.
that this was
I
the
thought
last
this was his last
Elmer
proper
Fudd.
Fudd. Yeah.
Hmm.
This was Chuck. I know this is Chuck Jones. I don't
Yeah.
see anything. I mean, it's a whole fucking thing. I can't read it all right now. That would lead to
Yeah.
a bad episode of podcasting, which I guess wouldn't be like too far off course for us. A bad podcast episode. Who knew we could do it? But that alone makes it, oh, it's the last time Chuck Jones did Elmer. Like that's the end of a fucking era. Like
Yeah.
and like you said, 10 years later, they're kind of in their like last days of WCW phase.
And I want to note on that too. We keep talking about Chuck Jones. It should be noted this was the writer of this short was Michael Maltese, who had like 2 years ago had also done One Froggy Evening with Chuck Jones. So this is it's kind of an amazing 1-2 punch, regardless of anything else either of them had done. That like
This is that fastball thrower.
Yeah, One Froggy Evening is such a perfect. In the documentary I watched, Spielberg describes it as the perfect cartoon.
Because I found it. It is Chuck Jones, Extremes and In-Betweens, a life in animation.
Thank you.
Thank you,
That is
Letterboxd.
fun. Yeah. Good
Hey.
good watch. You could find it ripped on YouTube. I don't know if you can find it anywhere else. But you have One Froggy
Certainly
Evening.
not on Max.
You have One Froggy Evening, then 2 years later you have What's Opera Doc. These two just titanic Warner Brothers shorts, and it is just interesting in a way to consider. Like we talked about, Chuck Jones starts with Sniffles the mouse, right? And then moves to the point. But we should note, this is not the end of the line for Chuck.
No.
Even if Warner Brothers doesn't quite invest in this anymore, he ends up winning an Oscar for The Dot and the Line. This extraordinarily abstract, experimental, and very beautiful animated romance story between literally a dot and a line.
Yeah.
He, as you mentioned before, here he makes the Grinch. He does,
Yeah. And he made the Grinch because he worked with Dr. Seuss in the during World War II.
Yes, yeah.
They met each other and they became friends there.
And one of those Dr. Seuss things from World War II won an Oscar and is gone. You just can't watch it anywhere. That's a fact.
Is it problematic?
Yes,
or is
it is.
Just...
Yes, it is. It's called Design for Death. It won the Oscar for Best Documentary. Dr. Seuss later disowned it. And it just cannot be seen. As far as I've never been able to track it down, if it can be seen somewhere, reach out to me. Let me know. Somebody touch base. I'll go where I got to go.
Yeah.
But
reach out to him. Leave me alone.
But, I just wanted to give that kind of context of, it's kind of remarkable that on the one hand, you would almost think in so many of these stories and so many of these people that we talk about, the studio endures, but the filmmaker flames out, right? We've had a lot of stories that of guys where we're sitting here going, well, why couldn't they have gotten to make more? Why didn't they get to make more? Warner Brothers kind of doesn't upkeep the Looney Tunes more than a decade later, just lets it kind of fall to the wayside. But Chuck Jones is able to move on and innovate in so many other ways and do so many other iconic things. I think it's so interesting that he is able to do that, that he's not bound to these characters or the studio or anything.
Especially in animation.
Yeah.
Because we've talked about it in past episodes about how American animation became so dominated by the idea of it should be like a Disney's idea of what animation should be. And once Walt died, animation in America kind of just like nobody knew what to do. Don Bluth tried to make a go out of it, to some success a little bit, but animators really, if it doesn't work out, it's kind of like, well, where else do we go? Like what else do we do? So yeah, it's pretty fucking cool, pretty boss that this guy was just like, yeah, I'm gonna go do all the shit now and just leave you idiots in the dust.
I think, and it wasn't all successful. People don't love his run on Tom and Jerry or anything like that, but he was trying.
Listen, Tom and Jerry is unimpeachable. It's a
Well, he
cat and a mouse
created.
just fighting.
If we're going to talk about long running characters, he created Wile E. Coyote and the
Yes.
Roadrunner,
Yeah.
and like he lived by. And honestly, like I adore the concept of the 9 rules. You
Well,
know,
here's your chance to get into that because I have great news for you, Sierra. This is your chance to talk about the Coyote rules because again, there are no Coyote and Roadrunner films in the National Film Registry, and in fact, the opposite of the National Film Registry is happening right now. A studio might straight up delete a Coyote movie.
is
As
it
we're
already
recording
done?
this, we don't know. As we are recording this, Warner Brothers is still on the fence whether or not they are going to literally delete the movie.
Is it done?
It's completed. They
It's
could
a
have shopped it.
completed,
Yeah.
done. It's done. It's done. It's a legitimately finished movie.
As we record
Not
this,
shot, and
yeah.
it's not a thing where it's shot, but they didn't edit it. Oh, they need to finish special effects and sound effects. Like, no,
It's
it's
in the
done.
can.
It's done. Yeah.
Wow.
As we record this, I think last week Eric Bauza got up at the Annie Awards and like yelled out "Release Coyote versus Acme." Other studios were like, "If you don't want this, we'll buy it off of you." Like Netflix is like, "We'd like to release it." But internal reports, and again, this is all, I'm not saying anything other that hasn't been reported in some publication. You know, you can find Variety articles, you can find that. Internal reports suggest that now Warner Brothers is reluctant to give it to another studio because if it gets released and it's successful, they will look bad.
Well, yeah, they're
So,
going to look bad. They already look bad.
yeah.
I mean,
So,
this is the second time that they've done this.
yep.
Because there's an entire Batgirl movie that.
Well, but the difference here, I will say, and I'm not pro the Batgirl situation either, and that will someday, I'm sure, see the light of day, even if somebody leaks it. The thing that's crazy is everybody who has seen Coyote versus Acme has come out of this thing and been like, it's really fucking good. Like, they could use this right now. Like, this is really good.
Wow.
And
Well, I mean, it's anti-capitalist, so that's a problem. I can't have that.
I mean, it's, but you got John Cena's in that. You got Will Forte in it. Everybody's coming away loving it. But anyway, so you were talking about Chuck Jones's rules. Let's get into that. I know that's something you.
So the concept of the 9 rules were, essentially he created this character and he had a very, distinct idea.
Coyote specifically, right?
The Coyote specifically. And yeah, so he created these set of rules that are still used today that the Coyote has to behave within these sets of rules. And like almost all of them are, he is humiliated by, well, actually, that's actually rule number 9 is the Coyote is always more humiliated than harmed by his failures. His greatest, his greatest foe is the Acme Corporation. The Roadrunner never harms him unless it's insult with beep beep. And I could read the whole list, but I'm not going to.
If you want to, you're more than welcome to. It's your time.
Well, all right. So I'll read the whole list because all of your listeners can't just go on the internet and look this up themselves.
They can, but they're not going to.
Yeah,
you
parents
lazy
don't know
bastards.
how to use the internet.
All
Sarah,
right,
if I ask Tom to do that right now, he's not going to, and he's on the show.
This is for the lazy bastards or the people that are stuck underground on the train. The rules, the 9 rules for Wile E. Coyote, as written by Chuck Jones. Rule number 1, the Roadrunner cannot harm the Coyote except by going beep beep. 2, no outside force can harm the Coyote, only his own ineptitude or the failure of Acme products. Rule number 3, the Coyote could stop any time if he were not a fanatic. Yeah.
I love that phrasing. He's a fanatic.
Fanatic. Yeah. Number 4, no dialogue ever except for beep beep. Number 5, the Roadrunner must stay on the road. Otherwise, logically, he would not be called the Roadrunner. Number 6. All action must be confined to the natural environment of the two characters, the southwest of the two characters in the Southwest American desert. Number 7. All materials, tools, weapons, or mechanical conveniences must be obtained from the Acme Corporation. Number 8. Whenever possible, make gravity the coyote's greatest enemy. And number 9. The coyote is always more humiliated than harmed by his failures.
See, that, I think, I'm glad you read that, because that, even though we're not talking about a coyote short today, you can see that same principle at play in What's Opera Doc and in all of his best work, which is similarly here. Both of these characters are still playing by their inherent rules, right? It's still playing by their inherent rules. And we, as a lot of people, kind of get the instinct when it comes to comedy or anything like that of like, oh, wouldn't it be funny to subvert all that, right? You're always going to have some idiot in the room who goes, yeah, but we're always used to Elmer Fudd, being tricked that Bugs is lady. What if one time he goes, wait a minute, you're a rabbit, you know? And I get the impulse to do that and to undercut that, but once you undercut that,
Right.
it's broken. Once Coyote catches the Roadrunner, it's kind of broken, right?
Right.
Like once you do any of that, it's broken. And part of what makes What's Opera Doc work so well is that he's still adhering to these rules. There's something he says in that documentary that I thought was so interesting when he's talking about classical music, right? And the use of classical music, which certainly comes through here, right? He was saying it in reference, I think, to the high note, the short that he did where the musical note becomes a little person in a little hat and moves stuff around.
Yeah.
And he says there's nothing in the high note, not a single thing we show that is not a part of musical notation.
Yeah.
Because
I remember.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you were saying?
No, I was just going to say, I remember when I was learning music, my teachers used this as an educational tool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because, this is how you teach music to children.
And because there's nothing in it that breaks those rules. And the audience appreciates if you work within those rules, right? They appreciate that you're putting in the effort. They feel the effort, even if they don't acknowledge it up front. He says about classical music, if you're using classical music, if you're using songs that everybody knows, there's guidelines you have to follow because you can't edit the music. You have to follow that rhythm, right? You have to, in these cases, right? You have to work your way to, almighty warrior. So, you do this whole bit. What Bugs is saying has to fit that melody. And we, as an audience, even if you don't think about it in the moment, we appreciate the fact that he managed to find a way to fit What's Up, Doc within the music of Wagner, right? Like that he manages to do that. That Killed a Wabbit is fitting into, Ride of the Valkyries. We appreciate that he is playing within those confines, right? I think that's part of what makes this one so successful in the face of, we could talk about other animation from other people and up, but I love that you pointed out those rules because that you really do feel that in here, that he understands the game of these characters and he will not break it.
He's such a stickler for the rules and, staying true to the characters that even, fucking 40 years after this, is made, Space Jam comes out and he's just like, no, you guys, you fucking ruined Bugs Bunny as a character. If you followed the rules, Bugs wouldn't need to do any of this shit because he's Bugs Bunny. He doesn't need a team. He will destroy all these idiot Martians in an instant.
Right.
Like, so even as an old man watching a fucking crass toy commercial, he's just like, no, you fucked up. You guys are assholes. No.
Okay, but we should note, on the Space Jam topic, one of Chuck Jones's rules for Bugs Bunny is he will sacrifice himself in a Christ-like manner and be resurrected, right? That's why Space Jam 2 clears it, right? That's one of the rules, right?
No, that's a Tex Avery.
I feel like if he wasn't,
yes.
Yeah.
I feel like if Chuck Jones wasn't dead, Space Jam 2 would kill him. What a piece of shit that movie is.
But yes,
wow.
I also want to acknowledge, I think we're at the point now in our talking that as much as we can talk about the various things, I know, Sierra, you had mentioned you want to touch a little bit more, at least via text, you told me we should touch a bit on the Wagner and Siegfried and Brunhilde of it all, and the weird. I should point out, normally for this show, I try and do a lot of context, right?
Right.
Normally, like, we did Double Indemnity, I read the book. We did Psycho, I read the book and I watched the sequels. For this 7-minute cartoon, to actually have the context, one would need to watch the 8-hour Wagner Ring Cycle opera, as well as Tannhauser and his other operas. But to even appreciate the Ring Cycle, one would have to read the Epic of Siegfried. But to appreciate the German Epic of Siegfried, one would actually have to read both the Elder Ada, known as the Poetic Ada, and also the Prose Ada, the Younger Ada.
Yeah.
But to appreciate either of those Norse mythological epics, you actually have to go all the way back to the Volsunga saga, which is both about Siegfried and Sigmir and every Sig and every Brunhild and every it's there. I would have to do the most research I have ever had to do for an episode for this 7-minute cartoon where a rabbit
That's right.
dresses in drag and rides a fat horse.
That's right.
But I know you had mentioned to me that you want to really touch on like just how weird the source material is. So I'm happy to get into that.
All right. Layman's terms. We're just going to go from what I understand, because I'm not even going to use the power of the internet. I'm going to use my whole brain to recite what I understand about the Brunhilde story. Basically, Brunhilde, she's one of the Valkyrie.
She's so lovely.
She's so lovely.
She's so lovely.
She is. She's one of Odin's daughters, one of the Valkyrie. She is actually I believe the oldest of the Valkyrie. But anyway, she pisses Odin off for some reason, and he says, "Nah, bitch, you're mortal now." But
was that the Neil Gaiman translation?
Yeah,
you're quoting here. Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, nah, bitch, you're mortal now. But you can't go anyplace. You got to stay in this little ring, and you can't go anywhere. And you're going to be real sleepy until somebody comes along and wants to marry your ass. And this dude Siegfried is like, "Hey, who's that lady sleeping in the fire? I think she's a hottie, pun intended. I'm going to go marry her. I'm going to go promise myself to her." And then, whether it's his fault or not, he steps out on her. And she's like, "What the fuck, guy? I thought you were going to marry me, and you've married some other bitch. What the fuck?" Yeah, cool. She's real pissed off about that and puts a hit out on him. And yeah. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just going off of my brain. The hit is successful. And then she was real bummed that this guy wasn't, maybe he was under a spell. That's why he married this other woman. It wasn't really him. He didn't really want to cheat on me. And then she kills herself. And that's the story of Brunhilde.
Siegfried also kills a dragon at some point.
Yeah.
He does. He kills a dragon. That's a big thing.
I'm pretty sure this is just a Mastodon album.
Yeah. It's a mean Sleeping Beauty.
So that's kind of the thing is there's this added layer of, obviously we watched this as kids and like we know it's opera, right? And we know Kill the Rabbit, but as you know, with that story in mind, it all becomes that much funnier, right? Yeah. It all becomes that much sillier that it's Bugs. I should also stress, not the first time Bugs wears that costume.
It's not the first?
No. So the origin of Bugs Bunny in a Wagner parody is a wartime short called Hair Meets Hair. HERR meets HARE, where it's a Nazi soldier, a Nazi officer, and Bugs decides to trick him by donning a very similar Wagnerian woman outfit. Mm-hmm. And they do a little ballet dance. So, and I don't believe that Hair Meets Hair is a Chuck Jones short. I could be wrong. Somebody fact check me if they want, but no. You can feel like there are the seeds for What's Opera Doc planted in that short. And Chuck Jones just taking the initiative to go, okay, but what if we did that for real, right? What if we just committed to that? and that really that comes across. I think we're at the point now before we fully wind down where this is just a chance to
It's
kind of spitball our favorite bits,
it's
right?
you talking about all the research that you would have to do to kind of get all the references for this. It just makes it clear to me that it's always funnier when when there's just so much work for something that's so stupid.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
mean, it works
it's
because
why
they know it. So I think we're at the point now where we're kind of just going to need to, everybody gets their chance. What are our favorite bits? What are some of the? Because I'll just start with the fact that the two that still crack me up to this day are, as I've quoted before, just the melody gets lodged in my head of the "Oh Broomhilda, you're so lovely. Yes, I know it. I can't help it." Beautiful little lilt. The joke, of course, when he rhymes, he's singing the line and he says, Bug says task, and then they draw out. The rhyme to task is going to be ask, but because he'd have to draw out ass, and it's coming. It's just might I inquire to ask. Such a good little bit. I love that. And the fat horse. The fat horse is
Well,
incredible.
the fat horse is
Fat horse is
brilliant.
Oh, what a fat fuck of a horse.
Yeah.
Yeah,
my
I mean,
God.
my favorite bit is the beginning. Just, it's a stupid, silly little sight gag, but just, oh, look at the big shadow, and then just to reveal that it's Elmer and his tiny little fucking self.
Yeah, his little bullet body.
He's a little bullet man, and
Yeah.
it's just funny. I don't know. Everything with Elmer's funny. I mean, I miss these boys.
I think my favorite's probably the very end when, they stick to the bit and it's like,
Yeah.
no, this is sad. I'm like, no, he died. Broomhilda died. And he was like, no. Would you think this was going to be a happy ending?
Yeah.
And it's just so cheeky and it's lovely. Yeah.
So
my...
wrapping
All right,
up
well,
as well.
Oh, I was just gonna say, since we're on the topic of this, who is each of our favorite Looney Tunes guys? Who's your guys? I'm gonna Mark Maron this. Who's your guys?
Who's you guys?
I was never a Taz kid, and that's funny because I feel like in the '90s Taz was everywhere.
Yeah,
Yeah,
everyone had a Tasmanian Devil jacket,
myself included, but I just never Taz. I think I've always been partial to Daffy.
Yeah.
I think because at the end of the day, maybe it's just like, again, my favorite characters were always the Ducks. I like Donald. I like Daffy. I've always been partial to Daffy, in part thanks to Chuck Jones and his innovation, because when Daffy is first introduced, Daffy Duck is just a lunatic, right? He's just the I'm crazy. Chuck Jones is part of the reason, I believe, unless I'm mistaken, but Chuck is instrumental in turning Daffy from zany, funny character to a grieved, miserable guy, to just Hollywood industry man who is sick of playing second fiddle. And it's so good. It's such a good bit.
It is a good bit. So you like the Ducks? You're a Duck.
Yeah,
you're
I'm
an
a
MM.
Daffy man. I'm a Daffy
You're
man.
an MM.
Through. I don't know what that means.
A Mallard man.
A motherfucker.
Wow.
Oh God, I'm tired.
I was so bracing myself for some like obscene blue joke, and instead you hit me with bad pun, and I can't even be mad.
Norm Macdonald is my life now.
So yes, so I'm Daffy.
Sierra, who's your guys?
So, like, my favorite character, probably. That's such a big question.
How do you decide between Bunny and Claude? It could, this,
You
how do you separate them? It's like choosing children.
The Menendez children.
My favorite Looney Tunes shorts. Wait, what'd you say?
Oh, I love when I break him. It's so funny. He goes, "Oh, it's like choosing your children," and I go, "Yeah, the Menendez children."
Oh my god.
This is the most anyone's talked about Bunny and Claude in years. It's okay.
um, I genuinely love Foghorn Leghorn because I think there's nothing better than well, you guys know how I feel about idiot main characters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just like complete morons that think they know what they're doing. I love that. But my favorite Looney Tunes shorts were always like the such and such of tomorrow, like
Yeah.
the House of Tomorrow or the Car of Tomorrow or whatever, because it was just such a weird like history lesson of like how like a slice of life
Yeah.
type of deal, and it was just so fascinating to me as a kid. Um, like, oh, what the hell?
I get that because I just said I was on the Disney side I just said I was a Donald guy, but as a kid I always loved those goofy how-to shorts, right?
Exactly.
Which is a similar thing. Like obviously it's not quite the future, but it is just like, let me tell you how your radio works. And you're like, what's this?
Exactly.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
feel you
those were
there.
my favorite Disney things too.
Yeah,
But
Tom.
It is hard because I do love all of them. And it would be easy to say Bugs because Bugs is the man, or as me and Sierra were discussing before, the non-binary king of the world. And I love Taz because he's a little goblin man, and I love little goblin men. I love Yosemite Sam because he's a blowhard cowboy, and I mean that's just right up my alley. But I gotta go. I gotta go with Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote. I think those are always my favorites, and they still are my favorites because I think because it's relate. I always grew up loving Tom and Jerry, and I feel like there's that same energy there of the dialogue-free, chaotic energy that those cartoons would bring, where they were so pure cinema, which we talk about a lot on the show. They're just so purely visual. And I love the wordplay and stuff that happens in the other cartoons with the other guys, and I love all that. Don't get me wrong, but just the pure physical mayhem that would come out of the Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner stuff always killed me. I love that shit. So I would say of all of them, excluding Bugs because they are the king. Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner were always just like a fucking bullseye for me. They never missed.
So, with all that being said, as we always do, Tom, how do you think What's Opera Doc fared at the Academy Awards that year?
Is 0? Was it even possible to get anything?
Well, there's the Best Animated Short category.
Well, wait, I know it's a thing now, but it was a thing in
Yeah.
1957? I
Yeah,
didn't know
Best
that.
Animated
Okay,
Short
so
goes
one.
all the way back to the 30s with Flowers and
I didn't know
Trees.
that. I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
So
I guess it got nominated for that.
it did not.
Oh, fuck you.
So it's shocking to consider. First of all, it should be noted only one Bugs Bunny cartoon ever won Best Animated Short. To date,
Which one?
Nighty Night Bugs, which is a minor one in the canon. To date, only one Bugs Bunny cartoon and 0 Mickey Mouse cartoons ever won Best Animated Short. Tom and Jerry won a number of them. In fact, Mr. Magoo has won more Best Animated Short Oscars than Bugs and Mickey Mouse combined.
Well, listen,
funny.
I get it. Mr. Magoo is a real fella. We love that true, distinguished gentleman.
Do we?
He deserves all the yeah. I mean, listen. He look at all this. Look at all the good he did, and he couldn't see for shit.
Listen, as somebody who's watched every animated.
Are you an
short,
ableist, Mike?
I'm not. I just think there is a thing with Magoo when you watch. Like, I think the thing with Magoo is one Magoo.
The thing about Magoo is
The thing about Magoo is I've never watched anything Mr. Magoo, so I'm literally just pulling your leg right now.
Okay.
Yes.
Tom, listen, for a fact, it is entirely in character for you to go, yeah, I fucking saw the Leslie Nielsen Mr. Magoo live action movie. I had that tape as a kid. I loved it. Don't you dare speak ill of the
Okay, you
Leslie
know what?
Nielsen
Actually,
Mr. Magoo movie.
I actually did see the Mr. Magoo
Yes,
Leslie
you
Nielsen
did.
movie.
Of course you did.
Yeah, because I'm a trash boy
You
like Ben.
did.
Me and Ben watching Mr. Magoo on porches.
It's just so okay. So it was not. It did not get any nominations. It could have been nominated for Best Short Subject Cartoons, what we now call Best Animated Short. The actual nominees that year were One Droopy Night, which is a Droopy, you're Droopy the dog, right? Droopy's a Night. Yeah, Droopy's a Night. Another nominee, Tabasco Road, which is a Speedy Gonzalez short.
Oh, yeah.
UPA, we talked about UPA before. UPA had a short called Trees and Jamaica Daddy, which is 2 animated songs combined. The Truth About Mother Goose, which is one of the weirder Disney animated shorts. Do you know what Truth About Mother Goose here?
I've seen that. Yeah.
What's the truth about Mother Goose? Na-na-na-na. It's like, it is a short. Tom, you might enjoy this. It's a short from Disney's weird period where it's just explaining the real sad stories behind Mother Goose songs and
Yeah.
It's really weird. It's a Disney animated short with no Disney characters. That's just like, Mary, quite contrary. The real Mary died. What is this?
The real Mary was on the Titanic.
I wish I was joking, but they're just like, have you ever heard London Bridge is falling down? There was a real London Bridge, and it collapsed.
People died.
Yeah, okay, Disney. It's so weird.
And I'm just watching this short in a movie theater going, yeah.
And the winner did actually go to Warner Brothers. It was for Birds Anonymous, which we've all seen. If Tom, you will remember it. I know you'll say well, I don't know. So Sylvester ends up in AA for cats that don't want to eat birds anymore.
I love it.
Do you remember this one, right? And
yes.
then the cat who leads the rehab group absolutely wants to feast on birds. So that's what won, was Birds Anonymous. What's Opera Doc not nominated. For context, the Best Picture nominees that year were 12 Angry Men, Peyton Place, Sayonara, Witness for the Prosecution, and the winner, The Bridge on the River Kwai.
That's
just think,
a good year.
Yeah, just think when you and even Peyton Place is a rough watch. But Sayonara's even got some interesting stuff going on. It's not
then you got
entirely not race. Yeah.
And Witness for the Prosecution, which Mike put me onto, which is just, hey, what if a cranky fat man was solving crimes? And I'm just like, hey, I love that shit. Sign me up for more. But then fucking Bridge on the River Kwai. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
What are we even doing here?
A landmark year, a great year, good lineup. But they did kind of miss the mark in that, again, What's Opera Doc ignored by the Oscars, but decades later considered the greatest cartoon ever.
The Margot Robbie of its day.
And the first cartoon nominated, submitted, recognized, inducted into the National Film Registry, as long as you don't count Gertie the Dinosaur as a cartoon. So, a landmark thing. Sierra, thank you so much for joining us for this. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Throw out.
Thank
do
you.
you have anything you want to plug? Anything you want to shout out?
Man, I'm just vibing right now, having a good time, living life and chilling, and working my 9-to-5 job and making a decent paycheck that isn't making me want to fling myself into traffic.
All right. Well, we're all, you know what? I love plugging the concept of not flinging oneself into traffic.
Right. Yeah.
It's a great
having
note to end.
Having a wonderful work-life balance is, gang, let's all strive for that.
Unlike the new season of True Detective, we are not pro-suicide.
We're not.
Well, Sierra, thank you so much for joining us. We hope to have you back. Everybody else, stick around. We'll be right back with our picks for the National Film Registry.
The National Film Registry isn't some fixed object, frozen in time. It's always growing, adding new titles every year. These annual selections are made by the National Film Preservation Board, with members like Martin Scorsese, Alfre Woodard, and Leonard Maltin, and representatives from organizations like the Academy, the DGA, and the AFI coming together to debate and decide. But they don't just pull titles out of thin air. They pull from the public, people like you and us, who can submit their nominations for the registry in a form on the Library of Congress's website. What we do, at the end of each episode, is have Mike and Tom pick films not yet in the registry that they feel should be, inspired by that day's topic. At the end of each season, those films will be formally submitted to the National Film Registry for consideration, on behalf of You're Missing Out. Here are today's picks.
Okay, so, there was always a lot of ways to go with this, with the Looney Tunes aspect, or the animated aspect, or the short aspect, or the satire aspect, or the all of that stuff. There's a lot of ways you could have went. But for me, because this is the first Looney Tune that was inducted, and Looney Tunes is the best, and I love Looney Tunes, and I wanted to think about a cartoon that I could induct that I feel like is a maybe not a direct connection, direct descendant of Looney Tunes, but you could see the steps that were taken to get there that leads to this. Um, so my pick is going to be The Spirit of Christmas, the original South Park episode, the little short that they did that got them to make South Park a seemingly never-ending thing. Um, it's South Park. I love it. I inducted them. I put up the movie a few maybe it was last season. I don't know. At some point during the run of this show, I suggested the movie. So obviously I love South Park, and um, is there a bigger animated thing of the last 30 years bigger than South Park? I mean, probably not. I mean, The Simpsons was it before South Park. Then South Park changed the game in a lot of ways. South Park is ground zero, really, for like a lot of adult animation that we live with now. And I even kind of pointed it out in the episode that I feel like if it wasn't for Looney Tunes' resurgence of bringing chaos back into the animated sphere, we might not have South Park. The people might not have been primed for something this chaotic and this um, wild, and also like where the animation kind of isn't the thing, but it is the thing, but not in the traditional sense. With the cardboard cutout animation. It's a landmark piece of film. It's a short film that they made on their own, and it's legendary. It led to a big thing. These guys are titans now. South Park is still cooking with gas. It's got to be in there. I think even more than the movie. I think it's got to be in there. So I'm suggesting The Spirit of Christmas needs to be in the registry.
So for me, we talked about it on the episode. I could have gone a couple ways, and I'm a big fan of Chuck Jones's "The Dot and the Line," a romance and lower mathematics. I'd love for that to get in. I will put that up another day. We are in a position where, as we address, there's only 4 Looney Tunes Merrie Melodies cartoons in the National Film Registry. That is downright criminal at this point, especially because of how many great classic ones there are. So I felt like I just could not do something that wasn't a Looney Tunes. I felt like I had to right this wrong somehow. And there are a number of them that could go in: Rabbit Seville, Duck Rabbit Duck. We mentioned there's no Coyote Roadrunner, etc. But there is a Looney Tunes cartoon that is so influential and so significant. We mentioned, What's Opera Doc on that list of the greatest cartoons that those animators put together. What's Opera Doc was number 1. Duck Amuck was number 2. They're both in. Number 3 is Disney's The Band Concert, which is not in, but should be. And then there's number 4, another Chuck Jones Looney Tunes cartoon. And if What's Opera Doc is looking into the past, is looking into Wagner and the Volsunga saga, the time of the Vikings, this one's looking forward. This one is spoofing science fiction. It's not the debut of Marvin the Martian, but it is the kind of foundation of really, Marvin the Martian being executed so well, the whole sci-fi thing being executed so well. You have to know what I'm talking about. It's Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century from 1953. It's the introduction of the Duck Dodgers character, Daffy doing a Buck Rogers parody. We bring in Marvin the Martian. We bring in all of those sci-fi elements. It is in the same way that What's Opera Doc is a loving spoof of opera. This is a loving spoof of the tropes of science fiction. It's so great and so influential that George Lucas actually asked for Duck Dodgers to be played before the original run of Star Wars because he was such a fan. And in that documentary, the Chuck Jones documentary I talked about, Spielberg implies that George Lucas lifted the design for Darth Vader from Marvin the Martian specifically. I think if you are talking quintessential Looney Tunes shorts, along with What's Opera Doc, along with Duck, I'm like, Duck Dodgers is in there. It's an enduring character. They did a Duck Dodgers television series at one point, like recently, where Quentin Tarantino of all people did a cameo in an episode. So it's one of the most enduring pieces of Looney Tunes on iconography. And I think especially, I'll say it, we're not in the 24th and a half century yet, but we're in 2024. Is there a better time to induct Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century than now? Do it, National Film Registry. Don't hesitate. Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century is my submission to the National Film Registry. And that's all, folks.
Next week,
Andrew Daniels joins us today to talk about Robert Altman's Nashville.
I think the amazing, brilliant, thing about this movie is that you could read the ending in 15 different ways. And so what I think, one of the kind of thorough lines that runs throughout the entire movie is literally the entire movie is Nashville is a town that's based on performing. Everybody is performing.
You're Missing Out is a production of Neon Night Media. It's hosted by Mike Natale and Tom Lorenzo. The show is produced by Kaya Lampar and edited by Mike Natale and Kaya Lampar. More information about our hosts and guests are in the show notes. Thank you to Amanda Rush for our social media, and all of you for checking us out.
If you're listening right now or want to take the show on the go, every episode is available as an audio podcast. Follow You're Missing Out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, please leave a review and a rating. It helps folks find the show.
Want to watch the show or watch some of the films along with us? Great, that's why we're doing this. Don't leave us alone out here. Check out our YouTube channel. We've got video versions of every episode, uploads of some of the National Film Registry titles we're discussing, commentary tracks, and live streams. And once a month, I'll be uploading some content that's exclusive to the YouTube channel. So be sure to click subscribe and hit that little bell to be notified as soon as new stuff goes up. Because, let's be fucking real, I ain't sticking to a goddamn schedule.
So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
And we'll see you next time.
And you'll see us next time. Because we don't watch you, you're watching us.